very good evening and a warm welcome to the program from wherever you are watching. We're coming to you from the Serena Conference Center. My name is Josephine Karunji. Tonight, 2 days before the 5th of May, when we will know if, when and how the lockdown will be lifted, we look at where we are and, very important, how do we pick ourselves up after all of this? I speak to a number of women from different sectors sharing some insights. Lydia Nambiru is a journalist and researcher. She starts us off with some research into what our situation is in terms of households and businesses. From earlier conversations, Lydia says to respond to a crisis in a way that minimizes harm, public debate needs to be more accommodating to conversations of how the other half lives. The perspectives of those most influential in public policy and policy making, who are mostly professionals, tend to ignore the realities of Ugandans who are not like them.
If you lined up all the wages of Ugandans who work, and you lined up those wages from the smallest to the biggest, and picked out the middle, the payslip that's in the middle, that payslip would be 168,000 a month. That is how much, that is the median wage according to the latest National Household Survey by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So half of Ugandans earn that or less. Now, people in Kampala will say, oh, that's not possible. That's because they earn more. Like in Kampala, that middle pay slip would say 300,000. And if you're just stacking the pay slips of Kampala men, it would be 400,000. People who are professional, have a degree or above of education will argue that's not possible. Again, that's because they earn more. If the payslips, if you're stacking only the payslips of people who have a degree, the middle one would be 780,000. And if you are stacking up the payslips of people who have degrees and are men, the middle one would be 900,000, and that's why I think so many of us are out of touch with what the reality is for the actual, like, Ugandan. Well, all of us are actual Ugandans, but for the typical Ugandan, the Ugandan in the middle, because a lot of us who participate in public debate are not typical by any standard. We are privileged, we are well off. Even our sense of the middle is very, very far removed from what the actual middle is. Interestingly, unemployment in Uganda isn't nearly as bad as it's often said to be. It's just about 9%, and even among the youth, when people say, oh, these are the most unemployed, it's about 13. It ranges from 13 to 16%. Depending on the age group. But again, official definitions of unemployment are often very different from our personal definitions of unemployment. Officially, you're only unemployed if you did not work at all, were available for work, and actually actively sought work. So if you are making do with a CHEO that you're unhappy with, overqualified for, you may consider yourself unemployed or underemployed, or whatever the term you choose, but in official statistics you are employed, so you'd not feature. But I think what's most interesting about our unemployment statistics isn't our employment statistics is really the structure of it. How many people are in self-employment? Self-employment is considered insecure employment by the International Labour Organization, and it is perhaps what our president refers to when he says leja. More than half, 54% of Ugandans are self-employed, and and it's true that it is insecure employment. It's in fact often it earns less. It attracts people who are less privileged. They have lower education. it attracts more women than men. Like 61% of women are in self-employment compared to 49%. The average Ugandan household is 5 people, and most of those are children. As official statistics say, half of those are about children or elderly. But then again, official statistics of who is in the working age start at 14 to 64, which means they don't count children really between 14 and 18 as dependents. The average household consumption is actually way higher than the median wage of an individual worker. Is 325,000 a month. That's how much, on average, a household spend on consumption that is, essential services, but also sometimes recreation, going to a nice restaurant, and all of that. Although more than 70% of that is on essential goods and services. So if you take a household of 2 people, headed by 2 people who are median wage earners, the average consumption is just about 10,000 less than their combined paychecks. So, if they do in fact are saving, they're saving about 10,000 a month. That's a household of 2 people, headed by two people. So a month of lockdown would eat up about 3 years of their savings. Now you could say, oh, Ugandans should save more. Why are you saving just 10,000 a month? But you're telling a family of typically 5 people to try and not spend as much as 320,000 a month. That is both unrealistic and unkind.
Well, thank you, Lydia, for that picture you paint. So let's look at the situation we now find ourselves in. Such a national paralysis of sorts has not been seen since the 80s. The good thing with this one is that it was imposed and can be lifted at a given time when the situation allows for it. Let's focus on some personal perspectives in a few key sectors of the economy. We speak to Juanita Kamuli Babumba, who is the Deputy Director, Agricultural Credit Facility, Bank of Uganda, and she speaks about agriculture.
COVID didn't hit the farms, you understand. So production has continued, but the irony is the market linkages have actually been affected. I have my produce, my bag of potatoes, my bag of maize, beans, name it. Ordinarily, I would sit into a matatu, a taxi, and I would just take it to the market. But now, with the transport clamped down, that logistic was cut off in a way. It is still happening, but to a very small extent, not as freely as it used to happen. So you find that the lady will take the produce to the, eventually maybe end up getting the produce at the market. But now, the price at which ordinarily she was selling, maybe the katasa of tomatoes was selling at about 10,000. Now the price has come down. Why? Because there are no customers. The customers have been locked up. So you find that the prices have actually come down, all right? And then you find that she's not getting her projected cash flow, cash inflow, which was expected, at the time of granting the loan facility, maybe. She's not getting that expected cash flow.
Well, another question for Juanita is, how will credit facilities then help these people who have to service their loans for the small businesses they set up? Many people are worried that they will lose their property as well.
Measures have been put in place to help them. If you access the credit facility, it is going to be restructured as long as you're in agreement with your banker. Bank of Uganda has already issued the guidelines to the banks. They know whereby they're not supposed to charge if there's arrears, please. So the measures are in place. The banks are already aware. The smallholder farmer, the women, they will be assisted. So they don't have to worry that, where am I going to get money to service my loan? Repayment schedules are going to be extended, okay? And grace periods will be given to the ladies.
Well, thank you very much, Jonita. Now, Nelly Businjam is a policy analyst. She has worked in the NGO world, and she says, like just about every other sector, they too have been hit.
Many of our projects are being revised and most likely will be extended into 2021. But what that also means is that it has a huge impact on employees and of course the organizations on whether they can actually maintain overhead costs, salary costs into another year if the work was meant to be done in this year, especially if you're working with time-bound projects and the like. So this is not just an issue that's affecting businesses, it's also affecting non-profit entities quite a lot. And so you're going to see, just conversations with donors thinking differently and looking at how to support the impact of COVID on more critical sectors like health, education. And so we're going to really have, a bit of a struggle, competing for resources with even our government itself. And so I think the government really needs to provide a more clearer pathway for relief in the next couple of months. The tax policy framework is more or less the same, really. We still have to pay, taxes at the end of the day. I've seen, a couple of times during the last few months, you are extending filing of tax returns and the like. But at some point they'll also be hit hard when the tax revenues are not coming in the way they anticipated, and I'm sure they're feeling that already. And so what that means is that then you have to go back to the source, because the source where those revenues are generated from is where the support and the relief needs to start from, because without them there is no revenue. And so we're looking at employers. Some employers have already let go of staff. So if they're not working, they're not making money. And so there is no profit, there is no tax. And so in also entities where you're heavily relying on employees to remit tax so that they can pay the revenue that's required, it means that in this current situation it may be very difficult. So I think we are at a point where we need a critical plan for after the lockdown.
Well, it's time now for a short break. You're watching Perspective with Josephine Karunji. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, we move on to another question. Where is the most impact likely to come from, and what would be the recovery plan? Also, where are the success stories? We'll start with Dr. Madina Glover, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Economic Policy Research Center.
Most sectors that are going to be hit hardest, and those which are going to be the successes, we will not run away from the services, as I've said, as this is the majority where people are actually employed, and we see it's private sector driven, highly private sector driven, and highly dependent both on external and domestic customers to make it run. We see workshops have actually closed down, both domestic and international workshops. We see less of international visitors coming in, their lodging has gone down. So these have been highly employing so many people beyond agriculture. So the informal sector, the border sector, have been one of the most hit sectors within the economy. That's services. Those which I call the runaway successes, this has been interesting. one of the things we've been actually underlooking, and we see it as a big investment, but it's not going to be beneficial to all Ugandans, is the ICT. That's information and communication technology. We see now high level of innovation coming in from the ICT sector as one of the success stories. We see meetings happening more on Zoom, happening on Skype, webinars, and to me, it's leveraging. It has been a very big success in continuing engaging both the private sector and government in doing business. And we need to leverage more on this, even for the education component, as we've seen, government coming on board to distribute materials via the internet. So, but we can do better by trying now to ease communication via ICT and boost innovation within the country. The other success story I can see is agriculture, which is coming in. When we've seen maintenance of the agro industrial lines in terms of production. Those who are in subsistence agriculture, basically for them it has been a success because with good rains, they've increased agricultural production. Even labor from urban areas to rural areas has actually gone up. So more labor to the subsistence agriculture has actually gone up. And we see also another success happening in the finance sector, though we might see this success more in the longer term or in the medium term as the lockdown ends. How? Because right now, businesses really talk to their customers if they really discuss as government directed in terms of relaxing on loans and repayments later. And the loan is not going to end now. So we know that repayments have to be done in respect of that. So the finance sector might be one of the sectors that are going to recover, at least within the short term, if things are to go as planned. And not only that, even those who have not been borrowing before, the shy borrowers, now we're going to see probably a more high turnout of people borrowing from the commercial banks.
Well, indeed, there have been some sectors for whom this situation has been an enabler. President Yoweri Museveni, in every address really that he's been giving to the nation, has said over and over again that he will not be part of the panic or allow for pessimism. And besides the sectors that are leveraging on this lockdown, where is the optimism? Grace Makoko is a consultant in banking and she is a board member of DFCU Bank.
Josephine, three things come to mind when I think of Uganda and when I think of a reason for optimism. Firstly is Uganda's history. Uganda is a country that has bounced back from so many setbacks, starting with the post-independence turmoil to the wars and the volatile regimes we had, and the expulsion of the Asians, the regime changes, the coup d'etats, and yet Uganda was still able to emerge from all that. And those are setbacks that have economic impact. So that's the one reason I would bet on Uganda. The second reason I would bet on Uganda is population. We've seen the demographics. We've seen so many reports about the uniqueness of Uganda's demographic. I saw a report which said 77% of our population is below the age of 30. Now, that it could be a double-edged sword, but the positive of that is that you have people that are agile. The younger the population is, you have agility, you have nimbleness, ability to bounce back from a setback. And I think that can work in our favor. If handled correctly, that can work in our favor, the age of our population. Thirdly, is that there's a report that came out, it was last year, from Virgin.com, Virgin Foundation, that said Uganda was the most entrepreneurial country in the world. That's a big positive. If the entrepreneurship spirit is strong, you have the building blocks to start the recovery. Now, when you compare Uganda with the global economy, this pandemic is a global pandemic. We've suffered globally a demand-side shock where you've put the economy has been put in an induced coma because of to contain the health pandemic. So you just shut off, you literally turned off a switch.
Now, understandably, locking down may have been the best way to deal with such an unknown virus. However, as we look beyond the lockdown, the picture does not look good. Some businesses may have collapsed during this time, others may not survive a slow recovery. Unemployment is likely to rise even higher. Is there any optimistic outlook that one can hang on to? Governments the world over are stepping in to alleviate the burden of these crippling measures on their citizens. What could the government of Uganda do not only to ease the pain on its citizens, but also to ensure that they quickly return to a functioning economy?
The government needs to look at how can they ensure households continue consuming, because right now consumption has actually gone down because of the lockdown and because of corona. So we need to look at it in that way. So the second bit of how we can also touch on this is government needs to actually go first into clearing all its arrears with the private sector, you know, because that's one of the things that's derailing private sector performance, because they have no income to make it actually roll. And government is its biggest service provider. They provide the service demander. And government takes too long to actually pay back to the private sector. So we need to see the functionality of this being happening faster if government can clear its arrears or its debt with the private sector. And then also looking at where government can touch within this equation. So if we can reduce also the expenditures on the hard infrastructure within government, then probably can see that part of the recovery being the functionality also coming back on board. But above all, we need to see where government can touch and recover those components of the economy that actually affect the whole livelihood. Either that's bit services that have been heavily hit, the informal sector. So can we look at the incentive structure around this to reduce the burden, or subsidize heavy activities around health and education and transport systems? So we need to see this kind of pragmatic approach from government.
Uganda, really, we have to talk mostly about the informal sector. That's the one that will be the hardest hit. Your saloon people, your border riders, your small retail shops, your mobile money operators, the people who are doing all sorts of side hustles, the chapati, the Rolex makers, those people who live hand to mouth, how do you get money to them so that they continue, they weather this storm? And I think that what government can do is to start to think about getting funds by way of soft loans. I was reading a report by an op-ed by an economist in Kenya who called it a lifeline fund to give money to these people. One, money to just, like what the government did in terms of giving food, and with hindsight, and they always say hindsight is 20/20, maybe a number of people felt that they would have been better off getting money. It can be refined to give people a small amount of money, and they prioritize, a 50,000 or 60,000, they prioritize what they want to spend it on. And this is like how you give relief or disaster relief when you had a natural disaster like an earthquake or a drought.
The incentive structure here has to come from government in terms of the lucrative plan in taxing system, because that's the whole point why people are not formalizing, it's taxes. How can we have the incentive structure in ensuring the incentive plan or the stimulus plan for the SMEs, informal economy, is so lucrative that people will register to benefit from it? And not only benefit, but government should also be able to see that those who have registered do not only register to receive the package and go back, but to maintain themselves there, that they can give back when they recover, based on that they were there for them, so then they need to give back to government. But this has to be from high level of efficiency and transparency from government, and commitment to making sure the formalization takes place. So we have to rationalize the taxes that are going to come on board, the measures in terms of eligibility, and where when you start breaking even, when you start paying taxes, not that at the moment I start formalizing, the tax body comes in now to start taxing you at whatever level of income, even if it's not enough as a business. So we need to see the incentive structure very clear, which encourages people to come beyond what we have now, or relaxing it totally a bit completely for the informal economy in terms of the, if it's depending on the number of people being employed. So I think something which gives us to think back on how to do this best.
Uganda government's tax revenue is about 14% of GDP, according to the 2018 analysis of the World Bank. But its expenditure is about 20% of GDP. So the government already is spending more than it is collecting from us. Where is it going to find money to bail anyone out, individual or a company?
Nelly speaks of the need for a critical plan for after the lockdown. How can government cut back on the cost of running the public sector and give back to its citizens? And for that question, we spoke to Dr. Glover and we spoke to Grace once again. Let's hear what they had to say.
Can government cut back some of the expenditures to give back to its people? The issues around the high cost of administration, opening up districts, these are adding just more burden to the government. So if we can think of places where the burden to the government is high and reduce that in a political sense, because some of these issues are politically driven, if government can systematically or single-mindedly see the situation on ground and the reality that to reduce the current expenditure, which is more on salaries, we need to reduce on the administrative powers or the administrative divisions, then it's going to have higher spillovers on how much it's going to have for development expenditures. I can think that even government will probably still, of course, through the tax system, we cannot do away with it because that's where government makes its money. But how do you touch on the tax without it being regressive, hurting even the haves, without also necessarily also actually not touching the have-nots? You see, when you touch this rental tax, it's going to touch the haves already, which are already being affected. You touch fuel, it's going to affect both the haves and the have-nots. So we need to be cautious of the tax system and how we approach it, and to relax some of these means of looking for resources within the short and medium term. We can copy some of these situations from our good countries, whereby they cut off a bit of taxes and reduce the paid brackets. Of course, Uganda is a little bit high on the tax bracket because even already the people who are paying on the higher end are very, very few. So how can you further squeeze the few without them falling off and also then becoming informal? And that's something we want to avoid. So government expenditures need to be reprioritized, as we can see as a lesson. Do you need to really go back and buy more vehicles amidst this situation? Or harness the vehicles you have, both at government level, at the ministerial level, at local government level? We need to harness what we have, other than expand on the burden of the resources that we are getting from everywhere, and rather than buying again new vehicles. We could have recalled all these vehicles from local governments, and they do these jobs. Those which are laying redundant because of fuel, just because of some spare parts, which could be done, rather than buying again more expenditures on related infrastructure issues that could have been avoided as a result of the lockdown.
A number of initiatives that actually government can do. We'll start with the budget, the way the budget is drawn. And if we reallocate within that budget, we get the non-wage recurrent expenditure, that budget, and reallocate it. And there are a number of places that you can cut back and or you can reallocate and find money. So one of the things that comes to mind is spending on international travel. You know, government sends quite a bit of a number of public servants go on international travel for all the training, for conferences, for workshops. That's one place to look. Then also internally to look at workshops and public, there's so many. When you look at the hotel business, the people who actually, government is one of the major people who procure the services from hotels. So maybe to look at that and see how do you reduce on the number of workshops, internal travel, and whenever government comes up with cost-cutting initiatives, they actually look at that particular line. So cutting back on just the number of workshops, the number of trainings, the number of internal travel, the number of international travel, and seeing what funds can be saved from that. Then I read a report a while back that said that Uganda is one of the countries with the most public holidays. We have the highest number of public holidays. Maybe not the highest, but we are among the countries that have so many public holidays. Now, every time there's a public holiday, there's a function that goes with that public holiday. And every time there's a function, there's spending, quite a bit of spending, whether it's on, different celebrations, and where you have an official public celebration. That's also budget that can be looked at and reallocated towards saving that money up and putting it in a COVID alleviation fund. So I think that's some place that government can look. And then, just going through the different ministries, the different organizations, and seeing what is non-essential functions or non-essential expenditure. I think that would be a big part of, we would release quite a bit of money from there. The other thing, and this is not really public sector spending, but the other thing to consider is accessing funding lines, financing. IMF has said they will have some financing available for multilateral and bilateral lenders. If we can get financing from World Bank, from IMF, towards this COVID alleviation, I think that would go also a long way in providing funds. Now, the paperwork involved in getting those funds is just onerous, and it takes time. So it wouldn't be like the funds would be available next month or the month after. Although there's just so much paperwork and bureaucracy that comes from that comes in when you're accessing that financing. But the thing that government can do is probably to ask for a moratorium on the debt servicing, the public debt servicing from especially the bilateral and multilateral lenders, because that is money that you have. It's not if you got a moratorium on paying of that debt, or servicing that debt. It becomes like budget support. So you actually have the money in your pocket. You don't. So you say, okay, can we get a 6 months or 12 months moratorium on debt servicing, and then we keep that money and make sure that money is channeled to the COVID fund, the fund for the soft loans. The other thing that maybe government can do is to just look at its developmental agenda, the developmental programs, and reallocate part of that budget, because at this point, ramping up, there's all sorts of projects for energy, ramping up the amount of power on the grid, or doing certain roads. If you don't have, if people don't have purchasing power, if businesses close, then you'll have excess capacity on your grid. You will have, if the economy grinds to a halt, no one will be using those roads. So it's just to go and rationalize the development budget and say, okay, what portion of this can we allocate to the COVID fund without forgetting the future? Because yes, you will need the energy for factories, you need the power for factories, you need the roads ultimately, so you can't say you completely cancel it, but you just go and rationalize it and say, okay, what do we need now, and what can we put off for later as we try and get the economy back onto its feet. So I think that within even the budget, the current budget as it is, you can reallocate some of that expenditure. We've seen countries that have gone ahead to cut back on salaries for their cabinet ministers, on the salaries of their members of parliament. Actually, a lot of them, these officials have come and said, I'll take a pay cut. So, I mean, they can borrow a leaf from that and lead the rest of the population by example.
Bottom line will be reprioritization within the budget. And this money can be shifted within the budget. But above all, again, we need efficiency in implementation when this is done, transparency.
Well, quite a list there of options to look into. Let's quickly speak about manufacturing now. And the President has time and again emphasized this as one of the areas that should come out of this strong. When we speak about it, though, the thought goes to large businesses. One thinks of roofings, East African breweries, Nile breweries, etc. While this is not the focus of our discussion, these businesses have significant downstream effects. They employ many people and they provide supplies for the smaller businesses. Now, thinking about the small manufacturing businesses, for example, furniture shops near Kalere, the metal workers in Katwe, maize mills and food processing factories, will they come out of the lockdown intact? And if they do, will they find demand for their services?
Josephine, manufacturing and industrialization is actually our future. And I think this is a topic that has been up for discussion. It's dear to the President's heart in terms of get your manufacturing up, get your industries up, and reduce on your imports. So yeah, like you say, that the big guys are also very important. When you look at the top 100 taxpayers, that's where most of those they fall. So the people who are contributing the largest part of the tax is actually those the big boys, and so those are critical. But like you said, the focus on the people, the brunt of this lockdown will be on the smaller people. So like you said, your furniture workshops, your metal fabricators, yeah, your artisans in the different fields. And depending on how long the lockdown lasts, there will be opportunity. There will be a likelihood of them bouncing back. But if it takes longer, then, I mean, these people are reliant on purchasing power of Ugandans. So if most of the Ugandans are laid off or don't have a source of income, they cannot procure or get services from these small manufacturers. But it's interesting that Uganda has started on that road of buy Uganda, build Uganda. And I think this is the time to really fast track that program. At the end of the day, in most developing nations, government is the biggest spender. Government is procures services from different industries and it really has the biggest purchasing power. So again, we just need to go back and look at and implement, because the policy is there, very well written, the framework is there, buy Uganda, build Uganda, executing on it. And this is going to take just resolve from the leadership to get it off the ground. I know the petroleum industry has done quite a bit of implementation on local content, but there's so many other government agencies, so many other government sectors that can actually support Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. Whether it's for office furniture, when government is, whether they're renovating an office or a ministry, or renovating a building, a hospital. I mean, there's hospitals being built, there's schools being built. These fabricators, these local artisans should be the first in the queue when government is procuring services. So whatever infrastructure projects, I know we're talking manufacturing, but even if you look at the construction sector, we have a number of local subcontractors that are not necessarily getting the big contracts. They're being given to the bigger guys who have formed JVs. joint ventures. I know within Build Uganda, Buy Uganda, there was an option to say that if it's a foreign company, it should have a percentage of Uganda shareholding. But I think Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, now is the time to implement it. If government can procure from these people, from these manufacturers. I remember in the 70s, actually probably even at the independence time, the government houses all had similar furniture. If wherever you went to the bigger cities, Entebbe, Kampala, Jinja, Mbale, you found Gulu, you found the same furniture, same copy-paste furniture in all the government houses. And this was from made by the prisoners, Uganda prisons, and very, very high quality carpentry. So we have all these carpenters who can actually make furniture for our public sector, for our government institutions. If they were given facilitation to get better machines so they can finish their products better, they're equipped, they have the equipment. Most of them are skilled, but you can also upskill them for them to produce a product that government would procure, that would meet government standards.
Well, Buy Uganda, Build Uganda is a song that we've been singing for the last couple of years. How do we actualize it? How do we take advantage of the situation we find ourselves in to actualize it and make it an everyday thing going forward?
Yes, so we can actually, Josephine, we can take advantage of the presidential skilling initiative for the youth. Yes, and get our local artisans, our carpenters, and the different businesses that fall within that sector. Get them trained, get them upskilled, so that they produce a product that meets the standard for government, and then get government to procure from them. Whatever sector it is that we are thinking of revamping or which will be affected, if we can implement Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, we can actually help these sectors to overcome the impact of the lockdown. But if at the same time you have the rest of the businesses up and running through the soft loans, through access to soft loans, then they will still be in a position to buy the services and products of these people. So I think combining a soft loan program with Build Uganda, Buy Uganda, where government anyway is the biggest spender, government tends to have the deepest pockets, to then government then to buy from them, and government to compel its different institutions, and also to mobilize society, mobilize the non-government organizations to buy Uganda, Build Uganda, and give whatever incentives. You get incentives if you buy a product from a Ugandan company, or if you procure services from Ugandans. I think that can go a long way.
Now, finally, if somehow these local companies survive the weeks of the lockdown, will they survive a weakened economy? How do we, in the spirit of Bubu, Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, keep them afloat?
One thing to really take a critical look at is the domestic arrears. The last number I saw for domestic arrears was 1.2 trillion. That's something that government needs to address. This affects the cash flows of the local businesses, particularly in the manufacturing and construction sectors, because government procures quite a bit of services from those two sectors. And I know that in this emergency budget, the Minister of Finance said they would clear 400 billion of that. For the money they'd gotten from IMF, 400 billion was going to go towards domestic arrears. But that's something government needs to look at critically if they are to support local companies, local businesses post-COVID. Because the issue of domestic arrears is a painful sore for these people. It's hurting the cash flows of this business, and government will need to fast track the payment of all those arrears. Because you can imagine if you had a 1.2 trillion injection back into these companies in the various sectors, and I know that the manufacturers have quite a bit of that. A portion of that would go, quite a bit of that would go to the manufacturing people, and you can imagine what that would do for the cash flow of these companies, and how much more business they would be able to do. And when they have subcontractors, they have employees, they would be able to take on, maybe to hire more employees. They would be able to increase capacity of their factories, capacity of their businesses. I know that the subject of domestic areas, it's across the world, especially in the developing nations, but that's something that needs to be addressed as a matter of priority, to get the cash back into the economy, where it can work to keep businesses alive and to keep businesses, give the businesses that extra push they need, not to lay off. Because the thing we shall see with these companies is laying off of employees, even at that furniture shop level, carpentry level, at the metal artisan level, the garages. They will have layoffs if they can't pay their workers. So for all those businesses that are owed money by government, it would be a step in the right direction to handle that issue of domestic areas.
If this is our new normal for 6 months or even 1 year, what should our viewers be planning for, and what options are there for urban and rural viewers?
We know that COVID ripple effects will continue cascading downstream, and because of that, it's going to take longer for the economies to recover, even as persons. So I'll call upon my fellow Ugandans, even individuals like myself. If the lockdown really ends, we need to think of how best do we save when we go back to these jobs we have. How can we save for the long term, and how can we now be more cautious in our expenditure patterns? In terms of, we cannot now dive into construction of the mansions we are thinking about, because we do not know how the year is going to end. And since you know the antivirus, until it's found, and you're sure also you are receiving it downstream, you're going to benefit from that. So the excitement which is going to come from quick wins of borrowing more monies from the banks to recover the businesses must be a bit approached in a cautious way, because that's of course what might work, but you have to be more cautious because we are looking at more of how do you save? How do you save more without adding on a burden of debt? Even this is also applying to government. How do you reduce on the debt burden?
Well, that brings us to the end of our show for tonight. Thank you so much to all the women who contributed, participated, and even shared some thoughts to our conversation for tonight. Thank you for watching. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition with Sandra Twino Video.